Dear Secretary General, dear President, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, it is a great honor to address the Arab League representatives on the issues of cooperation between the Russian Federation and the organization. The relations are based on a memorandum which will be 20 years old next year. This would be an important anniversary. And we, today, with the Secretary General, agreed to take stock of where we are and what additional plans we can introduce to promote our relations in various fields, be it trade, investment, culture, education, and of course, cooperation on international issues. This would be one of the important tasks of the Russian-Arab Forum of Cooperation. It met already 5 times, and we are planning to have a 6th meeting sometime soon. I'm grateful for the interest the Arab League is paying to the situation in and around Ukraine. We appreciated balanced, fair, responsible position taken by the member states and by the League as such. We received in April the contact group of the Arab League, and it was a useful discussion which allowed sides to ask questions and to give answers. And we are very open to continue this dialogue with our friends in the Arab League and in other parts of the world, as it were. We have nothing to hide. We have explained the reasons why we started the special military operation. The reasons being many years of neglect, which our Western colleagues showed towards the legitimate concerns of the Russian Federation about our security, starting with NATO expansion closer and closer to our borders, in spite of the promises given to the Soviet leadership before the Soviet Union disappeared, and of course, pulling countries of the former Soviet Union, including, first of all, Ukraine, into NATO. Ukraine was chosen to be anti-Russia, as we say. It was pumped with weapons. Naval and other military bases were planned to be built on Ukrainian soil. The organizers of the illegal coup d'etat in February 2014 were not called to discipline by their Western sponsors. On the contrary, the West supported this coup, while the coup leaders, immediately when they took power, announced their intention to cancel the status of the Russian language in Ukraine, announced the intention to wipe out Russians from Crimea. They sent armed groups to storm Crimean parliament. You know the rest. Crimean people stood against this, and they held referendum on independence, and then they joined the Russian Federation. And the east of Ukraine, they also did not accept the coup. They said, guys, we cannot recognize this illegal power which you took in spite of a deal on settlement and on early elections. You couldn't wait several months for the democratic process, and you decided to use force. When the school leaders, by the way, took power, they violated the agreement, the first line of which was to create the government of national unity to prepare national elections. When they staged the coup, they went to the square with all these demonstrators, and they proudly announced, congratulate us, we created the government of the winners, which means that the other part of Ukraine, which did not support them, was supposed to be losers. I don't think this is the way to promote national reconciliation, national peace, and who else? I mean, your countries would know better than many others what is the price of this winner-loser situation when it comes to building national consensus. And later, those territories of Ukraine which did not accept the coup and just asked to be left alone, they were announced terrorists. They never attacked the rest of Ukraine. They just said, we don't want to be under the illegal government. They were announced to be terrorists. Anti-terrorist operation was launched, bombing cities by warplanes, artillery, multiple launch rocket systems. And that's how the war in the east of Ukraine started, which we managed to stop only 1 year later, in February 2015, when the Minsk agreements were signed, keeping Ukraine one piece, sovereign, territorially integral, with special status granted to these two republics, which agreed not to insist on independence, but to be part of the Minsk agreements, to be part of Ukraine. Special status was not asking for too much. Russian language, which is fully in line with numerous international conventions on minority languages, plus local police, the right to be consulted when judges and prosecutors are being appointed for these territories, and some special economic facilitated regime between these republics and the adjacent areas of the Russian Federation. Something like Republika Srpska in Bosnia has with Serbia, something like was promised to the Serbs in Kosovo. The deal was reached in 2013 with the European Union help. The deal is still not being implemented, to the shame of the European Union. Actually, the special status for Donbass in Ukraine was also negotiated with the assistance of the leaders of the European Union, Germany and France. And like in the case of Kosovo, the European Union failed completely to deliver on what was guaranteed by the signatures of its members. The Minsk agreements were sabotaged by the Kiev regime for all these 7 long years. In the meantime, instead of resuming economic relations with these two territories, they were in a blockade, economically and transport-wise. And instead of getting in touch with them for a direct dialogue, as the Minsk agreements endorsed by the Security Council of the United Nations demanded, instead of direct dialogue, they refused to meet with them. And they said that everything must be decided by the Russian Federation, which again is never mentioned in the Minsk agreements. But the demand for the Kiev regime to talk directly to these two territories is repeated several times. So this was clear that Germany and France and EU in general do not want, are not willing to insist on something they guaranteed to be implemented in this case as well. And actually, the gentleman who signed these Minsk agreements on behalf of Ukraine, the then President, Mr. Poroshenko, a couple of weeks ago publicly stated, when I signed those agreements, I never intended to implement them. I did this to gain more time, to get more Western weapons. And he said, we succeeded. For this purpose, the Minsk agreements fulfilled their role. Very cynically, but at least honestly. In the process, we have been repeatedly drawing the attention of our Western colleagues to the dangerous developments in and around Ukraine, especially when Ukraine was pulled into NATO. We proposed several times, starting from 2009, a treaty which would do a very simple thing. It will codify a solemn political commitment which was endorsed at the summits of Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe several times. Last time in 2010 in Kazakhstan. The commitment being about the support, the adherence to the concept of equal and indivisible security. which clearly said any country can choose alliances, but in doing so, no country can increase its security at the expense of the security of others, and no organization in Europe can pretend to dominate the security agenda. NATO was doing exactly that, by expanding, by insisting that NATO has the right to decide who is to join, disregarding the interests of Russia and other countries. So we suggested, since this political commitment did not work, we proposed a treaty which would codify this commitment and make it legally binding. We were told, no way, legally binding security guarantees can only be provided inside NATO, which is a violation of the principle itself, that no organization can pretend to dominate the security space. The last attempt we undertook was in December last year, when once again we updated this approach and presented treaties on security to the United States and another one to NATO. And again, we were rejected. They said, well, maybe we can think of not placing some of the dangerous weapons on Ukrainian soil, but as regards NATO membership, none of your business. We will decide together with Ukraine without asking you and without taking into account whatever concerns you might have. And in the meantime, the bombing and shelling of those territories, which should have been given special status under the Minsk agreement, continued, and the weapons continued to be pumped into Ukraine. When we understood that there would be no implementation of the Security Council resolution on the Minsk agreements, when we understood that the Ukrainian government is clearly opting for Plan B, we didn't have any other choice but to recognize the independence of these two republics, to sign treaty on mutual assistance with them, and to provide military support to defend their population from the Kyiv regime. The regime evolved during the period after the coup in a very specific direction. Successfully, in a succession, regime by President Poroshenko, just like its successor, regime of President Zelensky, have been adopting law after law prohibiting Russian language, prohibiting it in education, prohibiting it in the media space, and then prohibiting it in regular life, introducing administrative penalties for those who, for example, might use Russian language entering an office of local government or even a store. And at the same time, legislation was promoted to encourage neo-Nazist practices and theories. Those who were guilty, who were found guilty by Nuremberg Tribunal, who collaborated with Hitler, served in Waffen-SS. Those who were guilty in killing and murdering Russians, Jews, citizens of Poland, and other nationalities, they were pronounced national Ukrainian heroes. And this was another indication that the regime was going in a way of racism, Russophobia, and very aggressive Russophobia with that, and also in the neo-Nazist direction. We have been drawing the attention of our Western colleagues to these facts during all these long 7 years, as the Minsk agreements were sabotaged and the Russian culture and everything Russian was eroded from Ukrainian life. We got a very cold shoulder from the West, who totally ignored the interest of the Russian population in Ukraine, as well as the West ignored the interests of the Russian speakers in Latvia, Estonia, and other parts of the European Union. So we announced the special military operation. We are determined to help the people of the east of Ukraine to liberate themselves from the burden of this absolutely unacceptable regime, to be able to freely use their language, to practice their religion, their culture, their tradition, their family values. And this is exactly the wish of the people who live there. And you need only to go to these territories and to see how they feel on the territories not controlled by the Ukrainian government. By the way, we have invited all foreign journalists to go there and to see for themselves, to be able to learn the truth. There is not very enthusiastic response from the key media outlets, and some people admit to us privately that their governments categorically prohibit them to go there. The operation continues. We are not closing door to negotiations. Actually, when a few days after it started, Ukrainian government asked for negotiations, we agreed. And for almost 1 month, there were several meetings which led nowhere because Ukrainian delegation could not present its position. Eventually, at the end of March in Istanbul, they did produce a paper which contained the principles on which they wanted to settle. And we supported this without any caveat. And we suggested to put these ideas in a treaty form and propose this draft to Ukrainians in mid-April. Since then, we haven't heard from them. But what we did hear publicly were the statements by President Zelensky and his numerous, countless advisors, saying that we can only negotiate when we fully defeat Russia, take back all our territories. In the process, by the way, they shell those territories, living quarters, residential areas, schools, kindergartens. They shell the people whom they believe must come back under their government. Not to mention the methods of military operations they apply, using civilians as human shield, deploying heavy weapons in schools, hospitals, and other civilian sites and territories. So, back to negotiations. Since mid-April, we haven't heard any response from them to the draft treaty, which was written on the basis of their concept, exactly on the basis of the principles which they themselves proposed. And the statements from Western capitals certainly are very militant, very aggressive. The West insists that Ukraine must not start negotiations until Russia is defeated in a battlefield. That's official statement repeated by Berlin, Brussels, London, Washington, and some other Western capitals. So what does this mean at this particular stage? This means that we cannot wait forever. We cannot just watch how the people under the Kiev regime on the territories controlled by them suffer. We cannot watch the continued efforts to use Ukraine as a spearhead in a war against Russia. When Russian troops took some positions in Ukraine, we discovered dozens of laboratories which were involved in military biological activities, experimenting with very dangerous pathogens, with a clear indication that this was not just scientific experiment, but it was oriented towards creating biological weapons. We initiated the process under the Biological Weapons Convention, under Articles 4 and 5 to start investigation, and we will insist on transparency of anything the United States and its allies are doing in the area of military biological activities, because they have hundreds of laboratories all over the world, including Central Asia, including Asia, including Latin America. It is a very dangerous development. And another indication which is worth mentioning is that when our military take Ukrainian battalion fighters, prisoners, we immediately see what actually they are. They are all tattooed with swastikas, with insignia of Waffen-SS divisions, with Hitler, Mein Kampf, and the headquarters which our military take after the Ukrainians flee, they are full with propaganda material coming from the Third Reich, praising NEÇE collaborators, praising those who have been subject to the Nuremberg Tribunal verdict. So this neo-Nazist education of the population, if you wish, is very deeply rooted in the day-to-day life of Ukraine and especially of the Ukrainian army. We are sorry for the Ukrainian people who deserve much, much better. We are sorry for the history of Ukraine, which is being ruined in front of our eyes, and we are sorry for those who yielded to the state propaganda by Kiev regime and its Western supporters, trying to make sure that Ukraine becomes eternal enemy of Russia. This would not prevail. This would not succeed. Russian and Ukrainian people would continue to live together. We will certainly help Ukrainian people to get rid of the regime which is absolutely anti-people and anti-historical, if you wish. It's on the very wrong side of history. It's on the side of history which was accused at Nuremberg Tribunal forever. And the attempts to revive those absolutely criminal, illegal practices which were applied by Hitler, to revive them and to use them in the modern world, they are doomed to fail. I have no slightest doubt. Having said this, I once again would like to mention the discussions on this issue with our Arab friends and with our friends in other parts of the world. We want to listen to you. We want to understand what you think, what is of concern to you, what questions do you have. We would always be ready for this dialogue. We would always be ready to satisfy your interest. There are so many fakes in the situation in Ukraine and around Ukraine as it is presented in the Western media, that explanations, clarifications, regular dialogue with the real facts in the hands are very important. One fake story, which I would like to mention here, which is important to this region, is the so-called world food crisis, which is being blamed bluntly, unconditionally on Russia, as if the food crisis started on the day when we launched our special military operation in Ukraine. If anybody wants to be objective, they could read statistics from the World Food Programme, from the Food and Agriculture Organization, which describes the difficulties in the food market beginning with coronavirus pandemic, when some contacts and supply chains were affected. Then the Americans and Europeans started printing money by trillions of dollars and euros, and using this money to buy food and medicines and other stuff. Of course, the 4 drought in succession during 4 years in this region also played a role. And yes, the crisis was aggravated by the illegal Western sanctions against the Russian Federation. They were trying to pretend that sanctions do not cover grain, food, and fertilizer. And if you just take a look at the list of sanctions, yes, food was exempted. But what was not exempted was the possibility for the Russian ships to call on the Mediterranean ports. What was not exempted was the possibility of foreign ships to call on the Russian ports to take grain and other food cargo. What was not exempted was the insurance of the Russian supplies of oil, of grain, and what was not exempted was the payments mechanisms which were under sanctions. And this lie has been repeated more and more, again and again, only to culminate, in a deal which was eventually signed in Istanbul on the 22nd of July, which obliged the Secretary General of the United Nations, who initiated the process, to persuade and to get the decision from the Western countries to lift all those limitations which I listed and to stop preventing the Russian grain from being delivered to the buyers. And in the process, there was also a decision on the Ukrainian grain locked in Black Sea ports. For more than 2 months, our Navy, on a daily basis, was announcing safe corridors in the international waters in the Black Sea, provided the ships which are being blocked in Ukrainian ports because the coastline was mined by Ukraine. And there are some 70 ships from 17 countries still being there. They could not leave because of the mine. So we said, if Ukrainian side organizes demining or clears some safe passages, then in international waters we will be guaranteeing safety and security of the ships to go to the Straits and then to the Mediterranean. We cooperated with Turkey. Turkey agreed to do this together. But Ukraine, until recently, was categorically refusing to do this demining. Eventually, we managed to agree. In Istanbul, as I said, the second paper was signed. Ukraine demines. Ukraine lets the ships out in the open sea. Russia, Turkey, together with another participant, which is to be determined, accompany the convoys to the Straits. And if the ships are coming to pick additional grain from Ukrainian ports, on the way there, the ships would be inspected to make sure that they don't bring any weapons, which would only be detrimental to the continued conflict. This is just one example how the truth is being presented in a very distorted way to send the message that everything which is not good in the modern world is because of the Russian Federation. And the aggressiveness with which the West addressed this situation, both from the point of view of physical sanctions, from the point of view of the hate speech, indicates one very simple conclusion. It is not about Ukraine. It is about the future of the world order. Our Western friends stopped using the expression international law. They say everybody must support rules-based world order. And the rules are written depending on what specific situation the West wants to resolve in its own favor. And we are at the beginning of, very serious changes in the multilateral settings. More and more countries are thinking about some alternative means to service their trade instead of dollars. More and more countries are moving towards using national currencies in servicing trade and other economic exchanges, using supply chains which would not be dependent on the capricious behavior of the United States and its allies. It will take a long time, but we are at the beginning of a new era, which would be a movement towards real multilateralism, not to the multilateralism which the West tries to impose on the basis of the exceptional role of the Western civilization in the modern world. The world is much richer than just Western civilization, and who but not you, many of you, representing the ancient civilizations should know about this. And I think the movement is unstoppable. Trying to put it on brakes is going against objective process of history, and this would only delay, for some time, the eventual formation of the true multipolar democratic world. And I always say to my Western colleagues when they raise the issue of democracy in this country, in that country, rule of law, and so on and so forth, I suggest to them, while raising this issue, to start applying the criteria of democracy to international relations. After all, the UN Charter says UN is based on the respect to the sovereign equality of states. If this is the case, democracy should be respected in international relations. One country believes that it has done the right thing. Another country says that I don't agree with you, but let all others to listen to one, listen to another, and then make up their own mind. Let's not support the practice of one country or group of countries running all over the world, demanding from countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America, not to meet with Russians, not to meet with Chinese, even not to take pictures with somebody, It's, I think it's beyond the dignity of those who are doing so. They don't respect themselves. They don't respect those whom they try to threaten, if you wish, with punishment, unless they do what they are told. I don't think anybody can like this kind of treatment. And once again, I believe this treatment doesn't make credit to those who engage in such kind of activities. Before concluding, I would like to mention once again, to reiterate once again, our determination to promote partnership with the Arab League, our interest in promoting economic cooperation. Actually, since we signed the memorandum on our cooperation, the trade increased considerably. It reached more than $20 billion. Maybe next time we will count in other currencies, not in dollars. And of course, this amount is not something, overwhelming. Other countries trade with the region in much bigger numbers, but we are on the right track. The steady increase of our trade and investment activities is a good indication that we are strengthening the foundation of our cooperation. And this cooperation expands also to international and regional issues. We cooperate on Palestine, this issue which is in very bad shape. because of undesire of the United States to revive the activities of the quartet with participation of the Arab League representatives. We discuss Libya, we discuss Syria, we discuss other issues in the region of responsibility of the Arab League, and we highly appreciate the traditional interest shown by the League to get the position, the view of the Russian Federation, and for us, the advice of the League is very, very valuable. I understand there would be no questions? No. As you please. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and please trust your Secretary General to continue sending bright messages to the Russian Federation.